Spiritual Conversations of Reverend Alexei Zasimovsky, recorded by Elena Mazhorova. Father Alexei has been dear and close to me since childhood. When I was 6 years old, my parents took me to the Zasimov monastery. As a girl, when I would come to confess my sins to Father Alexei, I often cried in his presence. He never asked why I was crying. He would only say, "Cry, dear, cry." This means that Christ is visiting you, and he is an invaluable guest to us. There is nothing surprising that you are suffering, the Father often said. You must suffer to understand the suffering of others. Endure. Christ, being sinless, endured reproach from the creature. And who are you not to suffer? Do you know that the soul is purified through suffering? Do you know that Christ remembers you if he visits you with sorrows? He especially remembers. The path of life is the hardest to choose on your own. When entering into life, you need to pray to the Lord to guide your path. He, the Almighty, gives everyone their own cross according to the inclinations of the human heart. The late Father was always very lenient towards those who truly desired salvation. There was no sin that Father Alexei would not forgive, except for the sin of spiritual pride. I humble myself, and save me, Lord, said Father Alexei. Do you know, he taught, do you know I think that people suffer only because they do not understand true self-denial in the name of the one who was crucified for us? Remember, where there is sorrow, where there is trouble, you must be the first to help. A person sheds many tears from a broken heart to become capable of comforting others. About the Lord, you need to go where the soul is in such anguish that it drives a person to contemplate suicide. It's not an easy feat. It's a feat that borders on the true crucifixion of one's own sinfulness. For only he who can bear the soul suffering of the desperate with the strength of his spirit can truly heal them. Who told you that God punishes people for their sins? What do we often say when we see a neighbor who has fallen into some trouble or illness? No, the ways of the Lord are inscrutable. We, the sinners, don't need to know. Why does the Almighty Christ allow suffering in the world? Often the human mind finds it incomprehensible, as if there are injustices. He knows what he is doing and why. Christ's disciples never thought that Christ would give them happiness. He knows what he is doing and why. Christ's disciples never thought that Christ would give them happiness in the sense of earthly prosperity here on earth. No, they were happy only in spiritual communion with their sweetest teacher, in the sense of earthly prosperity here on earth. No, they were happy only in spiritual communion with their sweetest teacher. For Jesus came into the world to affirm his followers in the thought that earthly life is a constant struggle. Christ could have avoided his suffering, yet he willingly went to the cross. That earthly life is a constant struggle. Christ could have avoided his suffering, but he voluntarily went to the cross. God especially loves those who voluntarily go to suffer for the sake of Christ. Why should I live not for myself? I often asked Father Alexei. Yes, dear, the late Father would say, you will only find peace in the Lord if you give yourself to serve others. Father Alexei never rushed with many of his visitors. He said many times, Lord, Lord, they are coming from so many miles away. After all, they come to me, the unworthy one. Lord, Lord, they are coming from so many miles away. After all, they come to me, the unworthy one. Well, how can I rush them? Regarding the prayer rule, he always gave me one very clear answer. Practice the Jesus prayer. Always, no matter what you do. But if you get distracted, take a breath before the Lord and continue again and again. The fear of God. This is what people have lost. The Father said, that's why people suffer, because they think that they can help themselves with their own strength. No, people are ready to die spiritually rather than compromise their self-love their noble pride, as they call it. Pride cast the proud angel out of paradise, losing his heavenly greatness because of it. People think that they will soon achieve earthly happiness and well-being here on earth through their own personal efforts. They are surprised and saddened if it turns out the other way around, forgetting that a person can't do anything by themselves, if the Almighty does not express His will on that. A person's hair won't fall from their head without God's will. God's. Do you really think that anything in the lives of entire nations happens without the will of the Creator? It often seems to us that something unreasonable is happening, something completely unreasonable, disagreeing with divine laws. After all, we don't know what will happen in the psychology of those who are suffering now. We don't know what perhaps Christ has decided to cleanse everyone. Everyone, the Father repeated. Remember everyone, thanks to these inhuman, so to speak, sufferings. Christ is eternal love. Love does not fade away, it endures. And Christ, from His heavenly throne, does not take His gaze away from this sinful earth for even a moment. He sees everything, He allows everything. But why He allows it, it is not useful for us, the sinners, to know. Remember one thing, you are a Christian, and from that perspective, always act in your life. What is the duty of a Christian woman? The duty of a Christian woman is to confess Christ fearlessly and never compromise her Christian conscience in anything. Here I am, Father Alexei said to himself. Did I think that I would have to console so many people? I feel weak, yet I care for them before God, answering for them to God. It's serious to be responsible for many who seek spiritual guidance. After all, I take upon myself, as it were, before God, those who trust me, and I will have to answer for them before the throne of God. After all, it's no joke, dear, to take upon yourself the responsibility before the Almighty for hundreds of people who trust in spiritual guidance. Many people think, what is the importance of advising this or that? Do you know that Christ places it on my heart to give this or that answer? After all, I myself, as they say, am not free within myself. It is better not to ask the elder's advice at all than not to follow his advice. The enemy of God is just waiting to entangle the unfortunate man in his nets for his disobedience to God's advice through the elder. Christ came to save everyone, the Father always told me when I expressed my sorrow for those I knew who did not believe in God. So remember this, he said to me once quite boldly. Remember that you believe in God only because faith has been given to you by Him. So remember, he said, I once said to him especially boldly, remember that you yourself believe in God only because faith was given to you by Him. Faith is, after all, a gift from God. You can't judge anyone for not being able to believe in God, as this often happens according to divine providence. Christ can perform a miracle in an instant. He can make an exorcist in just a moment. Persecutor, zealous one. The Apostle Paul went from being the greatest persecutor to the most zealous preacher of Christ's truth. But great is the work of confessing Christ's truth, to whom it is, of course, given. Whoever confesses me before men, I will also confess him before the angels of God. There are two types of martyrdom. Martyrdom explicit open. This is when a person is physically tortured. They are crucified, quartered, and generally subjected to some kind of physical suffering for the name of Christ. These are our first martyrs. And there are also martyrs now, who voluntarily crucify their flesh along with all its passions and desires. Here are our, at least for example, the closest servants of God, Seraphim of Sarov, Sergius of Radonej, and even the uncanonized elders, Ambrose of Optina, and Anthony of Kronstadt. After all, these last two lived so recently they lived among us. But did everyone really appreciate them for their worth? There were people who appreciated them. and there were those who criticized them. And so it has been and will be in all times and years. And we should never be surprised or outraged by this, because it happens according to God's will,